This will mark a significant shift in the leadership at the White House. As CNN has confirmed, Chief of Staff Ron Klain is expected to step down from his post in the coming weeks. Sources saying that is expected to happen after the State of the Union address, which is currently set for February 7th, but that Klain would stay on it for a bit of a transition period as they work towards his replacement. Now, this comes as Klain has steered the ship at the White House since the beginning of Biden's presidency, seeing accomplishments such as steering the country and getting COVID-19 relief passed up on Capitol Hill. There is also that massive infrastructure bill, as well as historic investments when it comes to climate change initiatives. Of course, there have also been a host of challenges facing this administration that Klain has overseen, including the withdrawal from Afghanistan, some low approval ratings for President Biden, as well as the issues involving the economy and the inflation. But this comes as really there has been relatively low turnover in this White House. Klain is perhaps the most high-profile official so far who could be leaving in the coming weeks. Of course, this is a very grueling job. Sources have said that he has talked for quite some time about the possibility of stepping down. It is very rare for a chief of staff to stay in this position for all 4 years. And pretty soon, the topics of conversation will start to shift on who exactly will be replacing him. Officials have quietly been speaking about this, and a few potential replacements on the table include Steve Ricchetti, who's served as a longtime advisor and counselor to the president. Also, Jeffrey Zients, who led the COVID-19 response at the White House before leaving within the last year. There is also Anita Dunn, another longtime advisor to the president, and then two cabinet secretaries who could also be considered. That's Tom Vilsack, the agriculture secretary, and also Marty Walsh, the labor secretary. So much of the focus as the White House is preparing for Klain to possibly leave in the coming weeks will be focused on who exactly that replacement will be.
All right. There'll be no shortages of stories between now and then on who the next chief of staff will be. That is going to be a very interesting story to watch. Arlette, thank you very much. Joining me now, former Republican Congressman from Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent, and Democratic strategist and former Clinton White House aide, Keith Boykin. Keith, this kind of turnover is not anything new when it comes to administrations. We've seen this happen time and again. What do you make of this news and the impact it will have on the administration? You can't dismiss it too much. Ron Klain is a very big deal in this Biden White House.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. And I do like Ron Klain. I think he's been a very effective chief of staff for the White House. He's helped to steer through important legislation through Congress, got the COVID relief bill, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, the prescription drugs reduction. You know, all these things are really important, and it wouldn't have happened without Ron Klain's leadership. He's someone I've admired and respected for some time. I worked with him back in the Clinton administration back in the 90s. So it's going to be hard to fill his shoes, I think, to be able to replace him. But having said that, you know, I think this is not unusual, as you said. It's not surprising to have a turnover at this point after 2 years. At this point in the Trump administration, I think they're already on their third chief of staff. So having one chief of staff last this long is pretty impressive. And I'm not sure who the replacement will be, but I'm hoping that it'd be someone who's not a white man, honestly, because every chief of staff in the history of this country has been a white man at the White House. And it's time, I think, for the other 70% of the population to be represented. So I think, you know, people like Anita Dunn and Susan Rice and other names I've heard are welcome to be included in the discussion.
Yeah, I wonder if Susan Rice will come up in this conversation. I suspect she will in the coming days. And Charlie, let me ask you this. I mean, what do you think? Is this the time for the president to make these kinds of changes on his team? I mean, he's coming out of this, he's still in the middle of this controversy over the classified documents, and he's weighing this very big decision about whether or not he's going to run for re-election.
Well, I'm not surprised that there is this turnover right now with Ron Klain. Look, being a chief of staff, as has been pointed out, is a brutal job. They treat you like a piñata, at least members of Congress do. They really do beat on these chiefs of staff. It's a tough job. But you know, they're heading into a likely campaign season. And when that happens, look, I can see why there is a change. I mean, who knows what Ron Klain would do on the outside? I'm sure he's going to stay in the Biden orbit and probably be very involved with his reelection campaign. So they're just going to be moving some people around, I suspect. I'm not surprised. It probably makes sense if he is, in fact, going to run for reelection, but I suspect the movement was largely due to the fact that this is a brutal job, and he's done his 2 years. He has a lot that he can say that he accomplished, and that's why he's moving on.
And Keith, this is all happening as the White House is contending with a Republican-controlled House. So the next chief of staff who comes in might have a decidedly more difficult position when they become chief of staff. But the new House Oversight Committee, for example, includes some Republicans who have been pushing these deranged conspiracy theories. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who claimed a plane or suggested that a plane did not hit the Pentagon on 9/11, Paul Gosar, who has appeared at a white supremacist conference, Scott Perry, who is a key figure in the effort to help Trump subvert the 2020 election results, Lauren Boebert, and so on and so on. What do you think? I mean, how does the next chief of staff, how does this next team, I suppose the next chief of staff will have his own team or her own team that comes on board with that person. How do they handle all this?
Well, I think Ron Klain sort of set the model, even though he wasn't dealing with a resistant Congress because Congress was in control of the Democrats. But I think that he kind of was a low-key, low-profile chief of staff. I mean, everyone in Washington knew him, but he wasn't on the shows all the time. He did his rounds when he needed to, but he wasn't the most visible voice in the administration. I think that that's got to be a model, I would think, depending on the personality of the person who follows up, but I would think that'd be a useful model for this administration, especially given the Republican-controlled House, because I think they're going to self-destruct. I think it's the job of the White House to sort of let them self-destruct, from a political point of view, let them continue to be obstructionists, let them investigate issues that aren't there, let them make fools of themselves while the White House is busy doing people's work. And I think that's the strategy that the president's going to be using, not only effectively for his second 2 years of his administration, but for his campaign.